I served as Commander-in-Chief of the United States Army during the Revolutionary War, which officially ended when the Treaty of Paris was signed in France on September 3rd, 1783. This momentous occasion ushered in the Treaty of Paris period, a time when there was neither a war going on nor a new constitution being written. The Articles of Confederation continued to serve as the document by which this country was governed by. The Articles provided for a unicameral Congress, which I, alone among these men, was never a part of. Between 1774 and 1789, the Congress chose from among its members a president, 14 different men altogether. At that time, the President of Congress did not also serve as Commander-in-Chief. They were two separate positions. Because I was not a member of the Congress, I did not sign the Declaration of Independence in 1776. After the Treaty of Paris was signed, Congress moved here to Annapolis, which made your city the first peacetime capital of the United States of America. I came here just before Christmas in 1783 to resign my Army commission before Congress and President Thomas Mifflin. There is a painting of this event inside the Maryland State House. I'm the one in the middle, looking regal and distinguished. President Mifflin is standing a few feet away. At that exact moment, President Mifflin had asked me, "Do you know who has the best crab cake in Annapolis?" Middleton's Tavern.
My name is John Adams. My parents tell me I was reared in Massachusetts. Those of us here, we're all politicians and we're all concerned about our legacy. And I've been discussing this with my wife Abigail, and we're really puzzled about how I should introduce her. Should I call her the first second lady or the second first lady? These titles recognize that I was vice president under General Washington, and later I succeeded him as president. During the Revolution, I was a member of the unicameral Congress established by the Articles of Confederation under President of the Congress, John Hancock, who had the honor of signing the Declaration of Independence. You do remember that it took 14 presidents to endure the Revolution. I was also part of the delegation that signed the Treaty of Paris. The delegation consisted of John Jay, Benjamin Franklin. Neither our British counterpart, David Hartley, nor I spoke French. The French lectured us about the importance of their language, how much better their wine was, and so on. We finally told them, just wait, someday in a future war, you'll need us, and then it won't matter what language we speak.
Well, my name is John Jay of New York. Although most people know me as the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, my term as one of the 14 presidents of Congress before George Washington took place between 1778 and 1779. Now, my predecessor as president was Henry Lawrence, and the only American prisoner to be held in the Tower of London, although he was later released in exchange for Lord Cornwallis. Henry did not sign the final version of the Treaty of Paris in September the 3rd, 1783. I co-wrote the Federalist Papers with James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, and unlike John Adams, I actually spoke French. I also served as the Minister of both France and Spain. After the new Constitution was written, I served as Secretary of Foreign Affairs where I negotiated the Treaty of London, which was in 1794. Now, most people have heard of the Treaty of Paris, but not the Treaty of London. I negotiated both. The Treaty of London wouldn't be enough to avoid another war with Great Britain several years later, but, well, it temporarily kept the peace.
John, what was one of your favorite affairs?
I have many favorite.
Thank you.
I am Ben Franklin from Pennsylvania. I was a member of the Second Continental Congress in 1775. Long after I signed the Declaration of Independence, I negotiated with the British to formally end the Revolutionary War. I did it along with John Adams and John Jay. The three of us were proud of ourselves as we stood our ground with the British. Adams used to tell me, in English, "Why do you insist on such an early start to the negotiations?" I replied, "Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." I wake up every morning at 9, grab the morning paper, look at the obituary page. If my name's not on it, I get up. People often congratulate me for successfully negotiating peace with the British, but I believe that it takes many good deeds to build a good reputation and only one bad one to lose it. We are all born ignorant, but one must work hard to remain stupid. Those who would give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. The new Constitution only gives people the right to pursue happiness. You have to catch it yourself.
My name is Thomas Mifflin of Pennsylvania, and I was president of the Congress when it was located in Annapolis, and thus when George Washington resigned his commission. Actually, in a painting that George mentioned, I was not asking him who has the best crab cake in Annapolis. I said to him, "Do you know what's at stake in Annapolis?"
You wanted to know who had the best steak in Annapolis?
No, George. I wanted to know if you understood what was at stake in Annapolis.
I know, Thomas. I was only kidding. Of course I knew what was at stake in Annapolis. A very future of continued civilian rule over the military. I'm only teasing you because you aligned yourself with the other members of the Conway Cabal during the war. A plot to replace me with Horatio Gates as Commander-in-Chief.
George, I was concerned about your handling of the Revolutionary War. In time, your strategy was successful, and your resignation, once the war was ended, provided for a peaceful transition to a permanent civilian government. But I have to concede, George, Gates was a loser. And 3 weeks later, on January 14th, 1784, I signed the proclamation that ratified the Treaty of Paris after it was approved by the representatives of 9 states. This means that January 14th is the nation's Winter Independence Day, the day that the terms of independence were approved rather than merely declared. There should be a major national celebration every January 14th with a parade, fireworks, all-day events, lots of beer.
Yes, for me.
Speeches by the elected leaders, most of them, and perhaps an exhibit of original documents owned by the Brown brothers, if they would dare bring them.
Who are the Brown brothers? Are they important men in Annapolis?
Yes, George, but much later on. The point is, George, more needs to be done to celebrate Ratification Day. By the way, I also appointed Thomas Jefferson to be a minister to France on May 7th, 1784. He eventually succeeded Benjamin Franklin as an ambassador to France, and boy, were they glad.
I, Ben Franklin, am irreplaceable. But Tom Jefferson did a decent job of trying.
Thank you, Ben. Although I later served as the third president of the United States after George, John, and the 14 presidents of Congress before them, I really enjoyed my time in France, as you can tell by my tan. And I also enjoyed my time with Salmon Hemmings, if you know what I mean. However, I must say, I also had a very nice time right here in Annapolis as a delegate to Congress. I stayed at the New Maryland Inn, as most of my fellow delegates did. There's a tunnel there, you know, from the Maryland State House to what is now the Starbucks.
What is Starbucks? Is it an important meeting place here in Annapolis?
Yes, George, but much later on. At the time, it was the King of France Tavern. The tunnel was intended to serve as a means of escape if the British showed up.
But by the time Congress came to Annapolis, the war was over. That's why I resigned from the Army.
Yes, George, but the tunnel was under construction while the Treaty of Paris was being negotiated, and so it was merely an insurance policy. Thankfully, it was never needed. It mostly served as a wine cellar for the King of France Tavern. It was their reserve of wine that I tapped into to celebrate your retirement, George. Do you recall the wonderful party at Man's Tavern the night before your resignation?
After spending $600 over the wine, I'm surprised you can remember it.
It was well worth it.
Well, thank you.
How could I forget, Tom? There were so many parties to attend in Annapolis when I retired from the Army. The gala you catered at Man's Tavern, Tom, flowed so freely with wine and other spirits that to this day, Annapolis is known as a drinking town with a sailing problem. Several months after I, George Washington, retired in December of 1784, I returned to Man's Tavern in Annapolis with a delegation of Virginians, including Horatio Gates, to negotiate the use of the Potomac River. We created the Potomac Company right here in Annapolis, with me as its president, and we agreed to meet the following spring in Alexandria, Virginia, to complete the details.
They'd have to pass the microphone at the Constitutional Convention, we still wouldn't have a government. I am James Madison, the serious one of the bunch, of Virginia. I served as the fourth president of the United States after George, John, and Ringo, and 14 presidents of Congress before them. I'm the one who suggested that the December 1784 meeting in Annapolis take place because I was familiar with the city and I knew that it would be better not to negotiate with Virginia, where Congress was meeting, in New York at the time, because Maryland and Virginia needed to feel free to state their grievances, which they might be reluctant to do so if the Congress were about, looking over their shoulder. Once the meeting in Maryland was successful, I encouraged Samuel Chase, you know, he's got his house right down the street here, of Maryland, who signed the Declaration of Independence, to attend the second meeting in Virginia in 1785. That George is referring to, although it was moved from Alexandria to George's home at Mount Vernon when the Virginia delegation failed to show up.
Let's back out where we came from.
Correct, James. The Virginia delegation apparently got stuck in traffic at the mixing bowl. Happens to me all the time.
Yes, George, but nevertheless, your home being located on the Potomac made us all realize how important that river was to American commerce, not just to the states of Maryland and Virginia. Both states signed the Mount Vernon Compact, which declares that the Potomac River would be forever considered as a common highway for free use and navigation of any vessel belonging to the other. It was the first mutually binding agreement of its kind between the two states, and it set the stage not only for the 1786 Annapolis Convention, but also the 1787 Constitutional Convention. The 1785 Mount Vernon Compact proved that the country's problems could be resolved if we all work together.
But James, you did not attend the negotiations. Why not?
You're right, Ben. I was not there. I was supposed to be there, but I was never notified of my appointment by the Virginia governor, Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death, Patrick Henry once said. I'd like to give him a knuckle sandwich. Anyway, after the Mount Vernon Compact was signed, Samuel Chase and the other negotiators invited Pennsylvania to join them in an effort to improve the navigation of the Potomac River to its headwaters, arguing that such a project would, quote, have for their object the interest and convenience of Pennsylvania's citizens and those of the other states in the Union. But it was clear that the barriers to trade existed between more than simply 2 or 3 states. Realizing this, I instead suggested that representatives from all the states convene for another meeting, not in Pennsylvania or Virginia, but once again at Mann's Tavern in Annapolis. That's where Chicken Roost is now, by the way, if you're wondering. This time to remedy the defects of the federal government, especially those that limited trade and commerce between states under the Articles of Confederation. Although only 5 states sent representatives, Alexander Hamilton, we were able to successfully convince John Dickinson, the author of the Articles of Confederation, that a stronger governing document was necessary in order to meet the obligations that the Treaty of Paris had put on the United States, especially in regard to paying its debts associated with the Revolutionary War.
My name is Alexander Hamilton. I attended the Annapolis Convention at Mann's Tavern with Mr. Madison from September 11th through the 14th, 1786. I was eventually tasked with writing a report called the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia the following year. I then co-wrote the Federalist Papers with Ben Franklin and John Jay. I served in Congress from 1788 until the new Constitution went into effect on March 4th, 1789. I did not serve in the new bicameral Congress. Just before the Annapolis Convention began at Mann's Tavern in 1786, a rebellion had erupted in Massachusetts, led by Daniel Shays. Some of you may know my daughter married Mr. Beach, and they together their marriage created the Hamilton Beach Blender.
We must move along. Alexander has a meeting with Aaron Burr. Yes, Alexander, that was a most unfortunate series of events, to say the least, in Massachusetts. Shays and his bunch took over the county courts in Northampton and Worcester counties and refused to disperse. Neighboring states had to call up their militias after Massachusetts took no military action. Instead, the state Supreme Judicial Court decided to issue 11 indictments of sedition. But rumors abounded that Shays would try to take over the court as well.
You're right about this microphone.
They ought to have Alex and Jimmy sitting next to each other and speed the whole show up.
That is correct, James. We have reached almost the last stage of national humiliation. We owe debts to foreigners and